In Scotland, a common word for an old woman, especially one with connections to second sight and divination, was Cailleach. But the literal translation of Cailleach is the Veiled One. For centuries, these mysterious veiled women were worshipped as gods. The legends and tales of the Cailleach come before united Scotland. The old Pictish and Gaelic tribes would pay tribute to the old gods of the land. The Cailleach always took the form of an old woman and were often referred to as the Great Hags or Crones. Once again in Scotland, the gods were less worshipped and more feared. They were beings of unimaginable power, and human life was not a great concern to the old ones. Tributes were paid so that the Cailleach would leave you and your livelihood alone, rather than to grant benevolent gifts like many other gods of the world. The divine hags of Scotland were associated with the creation of the country and the formation of the hills and lochs. They were also in control of the weather and the seas. Over Scotland, there were many of these old female gods, each with their own name and power. But when most people hear the word Cailleach, one specific being comes to mind, a god more powerful than all others, a woman known in all corners of Scotland, Dark Baire, Queen of Winter. Dark Baire is known all throughout Scotland and goes by many names: the Queen of Winter, the Blue Hag, Mother of Bones, the Old Woman of the Stones, the Great Herder of Deer, and in many places, simply by the title Cailleach. Baire was the Great Mother of all the gods and goddesses that have ever traversed the lands of Scotland. In some tales, she was told to be of a great height and was thought to be the mother of all giants. It is said that Baire had only one eye, covered by her frost-white hair, and dark blue skin like that of a frozen corpse. Upon her head she wore a dark bonnet, around her body clung a dark cloak, and with her always was a dun-coloured shawl, drawn closely round her shoulders. Although the tales of Baire differ depending on location and time, one thing they all agree on is that she was the first. The first of what, you may ask? Well, simply the first of everything. Baire, the original Cailleach, existed before all. Before the land and sea entered this world, the Mother of Gods was already old. Baire is both the goddess of creation and the goddess of destruction. Some tell that the goddess carried with her a great creel filled with rocks and stones, larger than the greatest of mountains. As she walked through the new oceans and seas, the stones would fall from her creel and land in the water, creating the land and mountains. Others say that she crafted the lands using a magical staff or hammer. Whatever the case may be, she was the oldest and most powerful of all the gods. This meant that every mortal soul in Scotland feared the Queen of Winter above all else. When angered, she was as fierce as the biting north wind, and as harsh as the tempest-stricken sea. In her fury, she would destroy woodlands, topple mountains, and with her control of the cold, she would kill indiscriminately, man, woman, and child. During the cold and harsh winter, Baire was said to walk among the woods of the Highlands. There she would use her staff to strike out any signs of growth or budding plant in the barren, icy wasteland. Some tales even say that Baire would ride upon the back of a giant grey wolf rather than walk through the land. Others tell that the Cailleach would lead a great herd of deer wherever she went. Byra would rule the land and all those within it. But after a time, her subjects began to rebel and long for the coming of the warmth, which was heralded by Angus of the White Steed, King of Summer and youngest child of Cailleach Byra. The King of Summer and his queen, Bride, were loved by all the people, for they brought with them warmth, light, and a bountiful harvest. It angered Byra to no end that her power had begun to pass away, along with her icy hold on the land. The old god did all she could to prolong the winter season. She would send terrible storms in the early spring and blanket the ground in a harsh frost. But eventually, she would become so weak that Angus and Bride would take over the rule of Scotland. Byra was near ageless. She had existed for such a long time, no one knew how old she truly was. It was told in many of the ancient legends that Byra did not die of her advanced age, because at the beginning of every spring, while her power was waning, she would travel to the Green Isle of the West and drink the magical waters from the Well of Youth. The Green Isle is said to float upon the waters, and its land is cloaked in an eternal summer, which produces the finest of fruits and the most magnificent flower blossoms, and was said to drift all around the Atlantic Ocean. On some occasions, it could be seen off the Highlands near Thurso. Other times, it would come close to the Isles of the Hebrides. It was mentioned in many a mariner's tale that the island held the power of youth. Some seafaring men would spend their whole life steering their vessels up and down the ocean, searching for the island paradise. One story tells of a young sailor who spotted the Green Isle, clouded in a luminous mist. And after many hours of sailing, the isle looked no closer than it had before. And as night fell, the Green Isle seemed to disappear beneath the rolling waves. It was the first and only time the sailor ever beheld the lost island of legend. It is said that no mortal has ever set foot upon the Green Isle. But then again, Byra is no mortal. She would always know in which direction the Green Isle lay when it came time for her to visit the well. The waters from the well were thought to be most potent on the first day of spring. The Cailleach would always reach the island on the last night of winter, which was her final day to reign as Winter Queen. There Byra would sit by the well, all alone in the darkness, and wait for the dawn. When the first ray of sunlight breached the eastern horizon, the old crone drank deeply of the magical water. In some versions of this story, it was said that Byra had to drink from the well before any morning bird visited the water, as if she was not the first to partake of the mystic water, old Byra would turn to ash and be gone forever. As the time-wearied old woman tasted the magical water, she began to grow young once more, whereupon she would return to Scotland and lay in a magical sleep beneath the great mountains. In a few months' time, Byra would awaken in the bright, warm sunshine, her hair now full and golden as the fields of wheat, her skin now a pale white, her lips red as the berries of rowan, and her eyes that sparkled like the light glinting off the sea in summer. The Queen of Winter had become young and beautiful once more. She would then travel through the lands of Scotland, clad in a magnificent green robe and crowned in a wreath of summer flowers. She was now the most enchanting and beautiful goddess of the land, all save Bride, the peerless Queen of Summer. Many think that this summer incarnation of Byra may be the founding history behind the Daoineachí and the Fair Folk. Perhaps Byra and her many children are who we now think of as the Fae, outlawed from being named gods and goddesses by the new Christian rule of Scotland. As the summer months continued, young Byra would spend time walking throughout Scotland, admiring the hills, forests, and lochs. In general, she would survey the land that she had created and ensure that nature took its course. But as the months passed by, the Winter Queen would rapidly age, and as autumn came, her brow began to wrinkle and her beauty began to fade. Once the cold months of winter came, Byra returned to the ghoulish visage of the one-eyed crone, the Cailleach, Queen of Winter. This transformation is recorded in a poem found in Wonder Tales of Scottish Myth and Legend by Donald Alexander Mackenzie. The Song of Cailleach Byra. O life that ebbs like the sea, I am weary and old, I am weary and old. Oh, how can I happy be, all alone in the dark and cold? I am the old Byra again, my mantle no longer is green. I think of my beauty with pain, and the days when another was queen. My arms are withered and thin, my hair once golden is grey. 'Tis winter, my reign doth begin, youth's summer has faded away. Youth, summer, and autumn have fled, I am weary and old, I am weary and old. Every flower must fade and fall dead, when the winds blow cold, when the winds blow cold. The great Cailleach Byra affected everything in Scotland, and there are hundreds of tales or stories that can be traced back to the first goddess of this land. In Argyll, it is said that while in the summer visage, Byra would come and drink at a small well on a mountain known as Ben Cruachan. Each day the young maid would lift an unwieldy stone slab that covered the well and pull from the hole fresh mountain water to quench her thirst. Each evening the woman would return the stone slab to its place atop the well. But it happened on one day that Byra forgot to cover the well at night. This changed the order of the land. As soon as the sun went down, a great torrent of water burst forth from the well and crashed down the mountain side. At the dawn of the following day, the woman found that the valley beneath the mountain had been entirely filled with water. It was in this way that Loch Awe came to be. A similar tale comes from Inverness, but this time Byra sat upon her great throne atop Ben Nevis, as from there she could survey all that happened in Scotland. The Winter Queen sent a maid servant, one of the lesser Cailleach, named Nessa, to a hidden well within the hills near Inverness. There the maid was to collect some water for the goddess, but when Nessa removed the stone atop the well, water began to pour out, and try as she might, the servant had not the strength to hold back the torrent, and so dropped the stone and ran back to Ben Nevis. The whole time, Byra watched from her mountain throne and saw the failure of the lesser Cailleach. She called across the hills in a great booming voice, "You have neglected your duty. Now you will run forever, and ne'er will you leave the water." At once, the maid was transformed into a river and a loch. This is the origin of the River Ness and the Loch Ness. A legend exists, told by the locals of Loch Ness, that once per year, on the very night Nessa became the Ness, she rises from the loch in the form of a young, beautiful woman, and sings a sad lament in the pale moonlight. In the dark silence, her voice was more elegant than that of the birds, and her song more melodic than the golden harps of the Sidhe. I mentioned before that Byra formed the great hills and mountains of Scotland. These were created to be used by the goddess of winter. Some of the mountains became homes for her sons, the giants. The giants of Scotland, by nature, were quarrelsome and spent much of their time fighting or competing with one another. In an attempt to keep them separate, Byra built them all great homes of stone, but even this did not deter the fighting. Each day, the giants would climb to the summits of their homes and hurl great boulders at the mountain homes of their brothers. This is why there are so many large boulders scattered throughout the valleys and glens of Scotland. The giant children of Byra came in many forms. There were some that were more timid than their larger brothers, and so would hide in deep caves dug into the ground. Those that lived in the forests were said to possess horns similar to those of the deer, and would venture from the woods only to take cattle, which they would pick up single-handedly and feast upon raw. All those of the human race feared the Winter Queen and her subordinates. But this fear was not found in the animal kingdom. In fact, it is said that the animals in Scotland loved and worshipped the great Cailleach. And as she walked through the land in the summer months, the wolves would greet her with howls of respect, the cunning fox would bark its admiration for the queen, and the raptors of the air shrieked with joy at her passing. Byra had a connection to animals, and would gather about her great flocks of deer, goats, sheep, and cattle, to whom she would grant her protection. In one tale, a hunter spied a prime deer in a patch of forest, and so quickly he readied his bow and took aim. The first arrow he loosed was heading directly for the deer, when the creature vanished and appeared a few yards away. Confused, the hunter loosed a second and a third arrow, but none would find their mark. This creature was protected by the Cailleach. My final tale of Dark Byra, Queen of the Winter, involves the cleaning of her shawl and the first days of a new winter. Each year, as Byra grew older and readied for her winter rule, she would wash her great shawl. But this posed a problem for the giant goddess. There was no loch in Scotland big enough to soak her plaid. This is why Byra decided to wash her shawl in the sea. She would go to a strait of water between the islands of Jura and Scarba. There lies a huge whirlpool, known to some as the washpot of the Cailleach, and to others as the Corryvreckan whirlpool. The odd water phenomenon was given this second name after a young Scottish prince called Brechin was drowned in the maelstrom. Some even believe that it was Byra herself who capsized the noble's boat and sent him to his grave. 3 days before the Winter Queen began to wash her shawl, the lesser crones and servants of Byra would be sent to prepare the water. For miles around, the frothing and foaming of the Corryvreckan could be heard. This has long been a warning to sailors to stay at home until the Cailleach's work is done. On the 4th day, giant Byra would come to the whirlpool and cast in her shawl. Then she would climb into the waters and begin to thread the shawl. She would not stop this cleaning process until the shawl shone with a dazzling white finish. To dry the shawl, Byra would cast it over the mountains of Scotland, covering them in a shining white snow. This signified the start of the Winter Queen's reign. There are many more tales of the great old gods of Scotland, of Byra and her sons and daughters. They are the very forces of nature that shape the world around us, and have done since time began. Now we are deep in the reign of the Winter Queen. Her white shawl covers the land, and we all wait patiently for the power of the Cailleach to wane. Thank you all for listening. And I want to say a special thank you to all those who have supported the channel on Patreon. Slán Живá.